There is a rule that shatters civilizations from the inside out. When the promise of mobility dies, the middle class follows, and then the state itself begins to shake. You inherit this moment not because you failed, but because the mechanism has already been set in motion. Empires do not announce their endings. They drift into them quietly, at first, then all at once. Rome did not fall when the barbarians arrived. It fell when smallholders sold their land for survival and watched their coins turn to dust. Spain did not collapse when its galleons were full. It collapsed when silver multiplied prices faster than wages, and the crown borrowed more than any future could repay. France did not begin in fire. It began in bread lines and tax ledgers where the educated were trapped beneath a ceiling they could not break without breaking the regime itself. Britain's decline was measured not in battles lost, but in winters without light when savings dissolved and the class ladder hardened into iron. The Soviet Union did not end with speeches. It ended with queues, empty shelves, and rubles that bought nothing. Japan did not explode. It exhaled decade after decade until youth chose silence over futures they could not afford. Picture this: streets still lit, markets still open, statistics still tidy. Yet the center hollows, the future narrows, the story repeats. And now it's happening again. But the pattern had already begun. The middle class is not merely an income bracket. It is a civilizational structure, a fragile equilibrium between wealth and labor power and obedience, hope and exhaustion. Every empire that builds one eventually dismantles it, not through malice, but through mathematics, policy, and time. The sequence is always the same. Prosperity creates stability. Stability breeds complacency. Complacency invites inequality, and inequality erodes the foundation that stability once stood upon. In theory, the middle class should endure forever: industrious citizens, modest wealth, rational governance. But in practice, it's a temporary phase between the extremes of poverty and concentration. When a state expands, opportunity multiplies. New industries appear, wages rise, credit flows, optimism spreads. Families buy homes, children study consumption, fuels growth. This is the age of belief, when hard work feels sacred and progress seems permanent. Then the cycle turns. Productivity keeps rising, but wages slow. The invisible contract, work hard, get ahead, begins to fray. The system rewards ownership more than labor. Capital compounds faster than effort. And as those who own assets accumulate more, those who rely on wages borrow to keep up. Debt becomes the bridge across a widening chasm. The illusion of stability persists for decades. Politicians promise renewal. Economists argue it's temporary, but the structure quietly transforms. Homes become investments, education becomes debt, healthcare becomes privilege. The essential pillars of middle-class life turn into gate-kept luxuries. Families cling to them as symbols even as they sink under their weight. History proves the same law across cultures and centuries. Once the cost of belonging to the middle class exceeds the reward, faith in the system collapses. The fall is psychological before it's economic. When hope dies, the numbers follow. Rome watched it happen as coins lost their silver. Spain watched it happen as inflation devoured wages. France saw it when educated citizens realized taxes would never buy equality. Britain saw it in the long twilight of its empire. The Soviet Union saw it when loyalty stopped feeding children. Japan saw it when work lost meaning. And America, the empire that believed itself immune to history, is watching it now. The symptoms are not hidden. Stagnant wages, soaring debt, homes priced beyond reach, degrees without mobility, trust in institutions shattered. History proves it again and again. By the time they realized it was too late. Stage 1. Prosperity and growth. Every civilization begins its golden age in the same way: expansion, innovation, and labor in motion. After war or crisis, scarcity turns to opportunity. Rome's farmers became landowners as conquests poured wealth home. Spain's merchants grew rich on American silver. Britain's factories roared with industrial power. The United States emerged from World War II with half the world's GDP. In these moments, work and reward align. A single income supports a family. Education opens doors. Home ownership is normal, not exceptional. The future feels limitless. Each generation expects and achieves more than the last. Hope is rational. But within prosperity lies the seed of decline. The middle class expands until it reaches its natural limit. Wealth spreads thin. Growth slows. And a quiet certainty sets in. It will always be like this. The pattern had already begun. Stage 2. Peak and complacency. At the height of success, empires forget the mechanisms that built them. Productivity still grows, but so do expectations. People believe prosperity is permanent. Rome celebrated endless victories. Spain believed its silver would never run dry. Americans in the 1960s built suburbs under the illusion of infinite expansion. The middle class, now the majority, becomes the heart of national identity. Politicians call them the backbone of the nation. Yet behind the optimism, early cracks appear. Costs rise faster than wages. Debt grows quietly. The latter still exists, but it begins to rust. Complacency blinds societies to decline. No one sees the shift because comfort feels like permanence. Stage 3. Wage stagnation and rising debt. Then the break. Productivity continues to climb, but the rewards stop flowing to workers. Wages freeze, yet output surges. The gap between effort and reward widens. In Rome, soldiers and craftsmen worked harder as their pay lost value. In industrial Britain, factories grew more efficient while wages barely moved. In modern America, productivity has grown 6 times faster than pay since the 1970s. The result is always the same: a silent erosion of the working majority. Debt becomes the substitute for progress. People borrow not to rise, but to remain. Mortgages, credit cards, student loans, all designed to preserve the illusion of the same life their parents once afforded. Debt is not a choice. It is a survival strategy. The empire still shines, but beneath the glow lies rot. Stage 4. Asset inflation and shrinking access. As wages stagnate, the wealthy search for returns. Capital floods into assets, housing, education, healthcare, inflating prices far beyond reach. What was once accessible becomes a symbol of status. In Spain, land became too expensive for commoners. In France, bread prices tripled before revolution. In America, homes that once cost 2 times annual income now demand 7. Universities become debt traps. Health becomes a luxury product. Each generation inherits less and pays more for the same life. Parents tell stories their children can't replicate. When we were your age, we bought a house. The next generation replies, when we were your age, we rented one. The cost of belonging to the middle class surpasses the benefit. The structure begins to buckle. Stage 5. Wealth polarization. The divide becomes visible. 2 worlds form within one society: those who own assets and those who do not. In Rome, vast estates devoured small farms. In the 1600s, Spanish nobles paid no taxes while merchants collapsed under them. In the modern world, the top 1% owns more than the bottom 90 combined. Wealth doesn't just buy comfort, it buys protection. Laws, loopholes, influence. The system begins to reward inheritance over effort. Hard work still exists, but it no longer matters. The ladder remains visible, but it leads nowhere. The middle class shrinks, squeezed between debt above and desperation below. The dream of fairness, the engine of democracy, flickers out. Stage 6. The death of mobility. When effort no longer changes destiny, hope dies. The middle class is no longer a path, it is a trap. Education becomes expensive but useless. Promotions vanish. Homeownership becomes a fantasy. In every empire, this stage feels eerily calm. There is no collapse, no war, only exhaustion. People stop believing. Birth rates fall, ambition fades. A quiet despair settles in. In ancient Rome, the small farmer became a tenant on the estate he once owned. In modern Japan, youth give up on marriage because they cannot afford it. In the United States, 40% of adults earn less than their parents did. The dream that once defined the nation becomes a myth. When a civilization no longer believes in its own promise, its institutions lose legitimacy. And then comes the breaking point. Stage 7. Political instability. Faith collapses before economies do. Once people stop believing the system can be fixed, they turn to extremes. In France, the educated bourgeoisie sparked revolution. In the Soviet Union, citizens abandoned loyalty for survival. In the 1970s, Britain strikes paralyzed cities. In America today, polarization tears through families, governments, and streets. Trust in leaders vanishes. The left and right mirror each other's rage. Information becomes propaganda. Every issue becomes a battlefield. The center where compromise lives disintegrates. The empire, now hollow, trembles. It still has armies, banks, and elections. But it has lost faith, and faith is the real currency of stability. Stage 8. Collapse or revolution. At this point, the outcome diverges, but never the cause. Sometimes collapse arrives quietly, like Rome fading under the weight of its own debt and decay. Sometimes it comes in fire like France when reform became impossible. Sometimes it arrives as hyperinflation, as in the USSR. Sometimes as demographic winter, like Japan. Each path leads to the same truth: when the middle class disappears, the empire's internal engine stops. The lights stay on the market's trade, but the civilization has already died inside. The pattern is merciless. Once Stage 7 begins, Stage 8 is inevitable. Unless radical change occurs, change that almost never comes from within. And now we stand in the same stage, 2025. Political distrust rising, mobility gone, wealth frozen at the top, hope evaporating below. History doesn't repeat, it evolves. And the next stage has already started. The world in 2025 is a reflection of every empire that came before, only faster, larger, and digitized. The collapse no longer happens through armies or revolutions. It happens through algorithms, credit scores, and silent inflation that eats from the inside out. We are not watching history. We are living inside its repetition. The first parallel is economic, the invisible corrosion of prosperity beneath record numbers. On paper, the economy grows. Stock markets hit new highs. Corporate profits surge. But beneath the graphs, the median citizen sinks. In the United States, productivity has grown over 60% since 1973. Real wages for the majority have risen barely 15%. The difference, the stolen half-century, flows upward into balance sheets and asset portfolios. For a generation raised on the promise that work equals progress, this is betrayal written in decimals. Families stretch paychecks that no longer stretch far enough. Two incomes barely replace what one once achieved. Credit cards and student loans fill the gap between expectation and reality. Debt has become the modern substitute for mobility. This is the same mechanism that hollowed Rome when silver coins lost value, and the same illusion that bankrupted Spain as silver ships flooded its ports. Today, the metal is gone, replaced by digital currency and infinite credit, but the effect is identical abundance that breeds insolvency. Inflation whispers, not shouts. It creeps into housing, health, and education, the three pillars of middle-class life. A house that cost $30,000 in 1970 now costs $420,000. A degree that once required a summer job now demands decades of repayment. Health insurance, once a benefit, now consumes half an income. The symbols of stability have become instruments of debt. Even work itself has shifted. Permanent employment, the covenant of the industrial age, has dissolved into gig contracts and algorithmic piecework. Workers compete not with neighbors, but with machines' code and foreign markets. The promise of lifetime security has been replaced by permanent uncertainty. Every empire experiences this pivot when labor becomes cheap and capital becomes divine. The Romans worshipped land. The British worshipped industry. We worship data, the new gold mined not from earth, but from attention and behavior. The result is the same concentration of power, a handful of corporations holding more wealth and influence than entire nations. The emperors have changed, but the hierarchy remains. Economic fracture breeds social fracture. The middle class was once the anchor of trust, the group that believed in the system because the system seemed to work for them. Remove that anchor, and faith dissolves. The symptoms are everywhere. Birth rates fall because children are now financial liabilities. Marriage declines because stability is an illusion. Cities divide into luxury and survival. Suburbs that once symbolized security now symbolize debt. A generation that should have inherited prosperity instead inherits anxiety. Social mobility. The sacred myth of modern civilization has statistically collapsed. In the 1940s, 9 out of 10 children in America earned more than their parents. Today, it's 4 out of 10. For most, the latter has not merely shortened, it has been removed. This erosion of hope is not economic alone. It's psychological. Hope is a currency. When it devalues, people stop participating. Voter turnout falls. Community life disintegrates. The dream shifts from "I will do better" to "I will survive." In Japan, this mutation is visible in the silence of its youth, millions of hikikomori retreating from society. In the West, it appears as a crisis of mental health and meaning. Depression, substance abuse, and nihilism are the social equivalents of economic inflation, invisible, cumulative, fatal. And yet the machines of distraction keep running. Social media becomes both spectacle and sedative. People perform wealth online while drowning in debt offline. Reality splits a digital Versailles built on borrowed bandwidth. When France reached this stage, it built palaces. When we reach it, we build platforms. But both serve the same function to distract the population while the structure beneath them erodes. Every empire's decline is mirrored by its politics. When the middle class fractures, the political center collapses. In America, polarization has reached generational extremes. The left dreams of redistribution, the right dreams of restoration. Both seek salvation through conflict. The middle, exhausted, withdraws. Trust in Congress, courts, and media sits near record lows. Institutions still function, but legitimacy is gone, and legitimacy is what keeps laws from becoming mere paper. Rome called it the crisis of the 3rd century. France called it revolution. Britain called it the winter of discontent. We call it polarization. The name changes, the pattern doesn't. The reason is structural politics becomes theater once economics becomes arithmetic. When upward mobility dies, voters stop debating policy and start fighting identity. When progress becomes impossible, tribes become eternal. Democracy survives on belief, the belief that collective action still changes outcomes. When that belief dies, democracy becomes ritual. Elections continue, but the faith is gone. The people no longer vote for hope. They vote for vengeance or withdrawal. This is the political signature of a dying middle-class chaos that pretends to be choice. Meanwhile, wealth consolidates further. Lobbyists, corporations, and financiers ensure no reform threatens the foundation of privilege. The pattern locks itself in. Those who sense it grow radical. Those who deny it grow defensive. Both accelerate the fall. Technology was once liberation. Now it is enclosure, a new form of empire with no borders and no armies, yet total control. The middle class once measured power in land factories or votes. Today it is measured in data. A handful of companies own the infrastructure of human communication. Algorithms decide visibility, opportunity, even creditworthiness. The invisible replaces the tangible. In Rome, emperors controlled bread and circuses. In the 21st century, they controlled dopamine and data streams. The result is the same pacification. A distracted population is easier to manage than a desperate one. Automation and AI promise efficiency, but deliver displacement. Millions of workers once essential now find themselves obsolete. Each wave of innovation promises to lift humanity, yet the benefits concentrate. Productivity soars, wages stagnate. Machines inherit progress, humans inherit anxiety. We are told it's transition. History says it's decline. When labor's share of wealth collapses, so does the class that depends on it. The Romans replaced farmers with slaves. The British replaced artisans with machines. We replace humans with algorithms and call it evolution. The middle class is not disappearing because of technology. It is disappearing because technology magnifies the pattern. Speed replaces reflection. Growth replaces meaning. Surveillance replaces trust. The extinction of the middle class is no longer confined to a single nation. It is planetary. Every major economy now exhibits the same symptoms: rising inequality, debt dependence, and collapsing fertility. China's urban workers face housing costs that outstrip salaries tenfold. Europe's youth unemployment remains chronically high. America's millennials are poorer than their grandparents at the same age. The global middle class, once the greatest stabilizing force in modern history, is eroding simultaneously across borders. This convergence is new. For the first time, decline is synchronized. There is no external savior, no untapped frontier, no empire to rise while another falls. Technology connected the world, and in doing so connected its fragility. In past centuries, one region's fall funded another's rise. Rome fell, Byzantium rose, Spain fell, Britain ascended. Britain fell. America took its place. But in the globalized order of 2025, there is no successor waiting in the wings. There is only a shared exhaustion. This is not the fall of a single empire. It is the systemic unwinding of the economic model that created the middle class itself, a model built on endless growth, cheap energy, and faith in perpetual expansion. Those conditions no longer exist. The machine keeps running, but the fuel is gone. And so the world enters the later stages of the pattern together: disillusionment, instability, fragmentation. The outcomes will differ. Protest here, populism there, quiet decay elsewhere. but the rhythm will be the same. When faith dies, systems follow. When mobility ends, history begins again. Every civilization writes its own obituary long before it dies. It isn't written in blood or fire, but in numbers, habits, and illusions. The middle class, once the symbol of progress, becomes its final casualty. It begins as prosperity matures into entitlement and ends as extinction. The pattern is merciless. Once faith in mobility vanishes, history accelerates. Families that once built homes now cling to rent. Workers that once earned comfort now sell time in fragments. Governments that once promised renewal now administer decline. The ritual of politics continues, but the purpose has evaporated. Nations grow old in spirit long before they collapse in structure. What follows is not chaos. At first, it's stillness, a silence between generations. The young stop believing, the old stop understanding. The middle becomes a void. Civilization drifts, governed by inertia, powered by nostalgia. The statues still stand, the markets still open, the speeches still echo, but the vitality that sustained them has fled. Empires never fall from outside. Rome was not destroyed by barbarians. It rotted until a single push toppled it. Spain was not conquered by foreigners. It consumed itself with debt and delusion. France was not broken by enemies. It was broken by inequality too vast to justify. The Soviet Union was not beaten by capitalism. It drowned in its own contradictions. Japan was not invaded. It aged into paralysis. America and the world that follows its model faces the same convergence of destiny. We were told the pattern was history, but the truth is colder the pattern is physics. Energy disperses. Systems decay. Prosperity consumes itself. And without intervention, radical structural moral, the outcome is predetermined. Some will look to technology for salvation, believing machines will deliver balance. But technology only amplifies the existing order. It speeds the climb and accelerates the fall. Others will look to ideology to revolution or restoration. But revolutions rarely create justice. They redistribute despair. And restoration is impossible because the past no longer exists. The middle class was never an accident. It was an equilibrium, a brief alignment of power, productivity, and fairness. When that balance breaks, societies return to their natural state, a small elite, a vast underclass, and a vanishing middle. History's gravity pulls us there again. Still, every pattern offers a moment, a single narrow window where awareness can become defiance. Rome ignored it. France seized it and bled for it. Britain delayed it. The Soviet Union denied it. Japan accepted it. America has yet to choose. Perhaps this is the prophecy hidden inside the data that the real collapse is not material but moral, the loss of shared belief in the possibility of renewal. If that belief dies, so does the civilization that held it. But the pattern also carries one quiet mercy awareness. Those who see the sequence can change its speed, its shape, maybe even its end. History's curse is repetition. Its only redemption is recognition. The middle class was not just an economic structure, it was the living proof that balance was possible. If it can be rebuilt, the cycle might pause. If not, the story will close as it always does, with wealth above, ruin below, and silence in between. History doesn't repeat, it converges, and the next convergence has already begun.